Harnessing Your Wealth isn't your average money podcast, hosted by Billy Peterson, a former jockey turned financial advisor. It's about more than dollars and cents. Each episode dives into the stories, struggles, and successes that define what real wealth looks like. From bold entrepreneurs to everyday dreamers who've learned that true success isn't just earned, it's lived. Because life, like wealth, it's all about how you ride it.
Welcome back to Harnessing Your Wealth. Billy Peterson, Shaun Peterson, our special guest, John Diehl. Today we're talking about aging parents, and this is a subject that everyone's going to have to deal with at some point if you have parents, but it's a touchy subject. It's one that a lot of people stumble with because they don't understand the best way to approach the conversation. Navigating health changes, financial matters, it's just deep conversations that are very awkward at times, and family members really don't take the time or have the understanding of how to even open that subject line with their parents. So we're going to think through this with John Diehl, who spends hours and hours and most of his time on the job at Hartford Funds handling these exact questions. And he works with the MIT AgeLab directly with them, uncovering the latest scientific research and exploring the best possible approaches to help advisors all over the world who help the advisors, and then the advisors in turn help their clients. So we're grateful to have him on board today for this conversation, recognizing when parents might need some help, how to approach these conversations, and allow the parents to age with dignity, with grace, and comfortability with their financial resources. Let's talk about the early warning signs, John. What do you see? What's out there that advisors are helping their clients understand the warning sign, maybe the first instance when they realize mom and dad need some help here?
Yeah. So what I would say, Billy, is that oftentimes the best time for these conversations are before you even see the warning signs. So it's we always talk about trying to move the decision point away from the moment of crisis, but obviously not everyone prepares for that. I think there's a couple of things you can look for. One of the big ones is movement and balance. One of the big things we're concerned about is a fall in the home. And certainly if no modifications have been made to the home, and depending on the layout of the home, are there any bedrooms, bathrooms on the first floor, for example, movement and balance is really important. And so observations in terms of that is one of the early warning signs, but also cognitively, we need to be looking. So if there are major gaps where parents are missing important events on their calendar, or the example I always use is they drive somewhere but can't remember how to get back home, that's an indication that something is going on. It may not be dementia. It may be an untreated condition that you should talk to your doctor about. But look, everyone forgets where they put their car keys. Everyone forgets where they parked at the airport.
Thank God. I don't need to go
I mean, what you're describing, like, I wake up and I think I've ran into a wall, and then sometimes I get to work and I'm like, how did I get here? So
right.
Maybe I better do some work on myself.
I'm watching you close.
Watch me close.
Because you mentioned, Billy, in the opening that we want to treat people with dignity and respect. Now, we all make mistakes from time to time. We forget things. What it doesn't mean it's time to move me out of my house. But this is why a conversation that even precedes those early warning signs is pretty important. And sometimes the warnings are self-stated. You go from, if you notice yourself, you're checking in with mom or dad once a week, just to make sure everything's okay. But then you find yourself checking in 3-4 times a week because something is in your mind saying, there's something here I'm worried about. That's probably the first indications that, this is a conversation that should occur if it hadn't occurred already.
I wonder if is there anything to this idea that you kind of plant the seed and let's say, all right, here's dad, he's looking like he's aging. And then I think, oh, it's on me to start this conversation about, Dad, are you okay? Or is everything all right? And do you need some help? And should we start making some changes in the home? Or
Yeah, it's a tough call. What I often observe is that when we talk about these topics, people often see the warning signs in other people prior to them seeing them in themselves.
Yeah.
Right. So as you talk about Hey, I was just reading this article. For example, did you know the average American moves about 12 and a half times in their lifetime?
Wow.
And the majority of those moves happen after age 60. So when my mom and dad got ill, or when my grandma and granddad got ill, what happened? Did they stay in their home to the end? Did they move in with a family member? Did they seek out a continuing care retirement community? Because that's a common experience. Because then you can say, well, if you're the child and you can get mom and dad talking about. So, for example, my grandmother moved in with my mother after she fell and broke a hip, and she couldn't return home. And being able to ask my mom about that experience, we've already shared a lot about it. But what went right? What do you wish had gone a different way? If something like that were to eventually happen with you, what would your preference be, right? Because sometimes if someone felt that they made the right decision in caring for their own parents, that's probably a path they've considered for themselves. Well, I would hope that I could move in with one of you, right? Or maybe they had an experience where a parent did move in, but eventually the medical condition became so acute that they had to seek a care community. When did that happen? How did you determine? I'm sure that was not an easy thing. Getting people to talk about their experiences relating to caregiving is a way to begin that conversation.
Yeah. We've had clients all the way across the spectrum who want the highest level of care, and money is no object, to those who say, look, if I ever start to slip mentally, send me on a horse out across the field and make sure there's a lot of gopher holes in that field. And I'm going down. The other guy wants
And guess what? She did that. The lady that said that, she didn't do it on purpose, but she died on a horse.
Oh, my.
What do you think are some of the mistakes that children make in preparing to, take on aging parents?
Yes. Let me give you the biggest mistake. They never have a conversation.
Yeah.
We just look, it's very hard for us to picture. We can picture our parents when we were younger because, many times we'll remember happy memories and things that we did. But we have difficulty picturing our parents getting older, just as we have trouble picturing ourselves getting older, right? So pretending that it'll never happen. So we never have a conversation. So let me tell you what happens. Mom or dad, now in their mid to upper 80s, fall and break a hip, or they have some kind of medical event. And the doctors say they're not going to be able to return back home, so they're going to have to spend some time in a rehab facility. Now, we as a family have to get together and figure out where mom and dad are going to go. When that happens, who do you think has the least amount of say in where mom or dad goes? Mom and dad, right? So even for mom and dad to begin these conversations, we're actually thinking about a research topic now called family care talks, which is, how do we begin these? What do we share about how we felt about caring for another? Many people, and I'm sure you guys may see this from time to time, one of the biggest reasons we say that people say when we ask, is retirement what you thought it would be? They'll come back and say, no, not really. And when we say why, they said, well, we had our retirement plan, but nobody ever told us that mom or dad would have this happen and they'd have to come live with us. And we're grateful that it happened. And we love the time that we spent together, but it was not what we envisioned. So, Billy, in the work that we do with financial advisors and clients, one of the things that I always bring up is as you're thinking about the future, the next 5 years of your life, for example, is there a chance you'll get the tap on the shoulder to provide care for another? That may be a spouse, that may be an aging parent, that may be a child or a grandchild. But just mentally getting to the place where what would be my role? Because, look, a lot of things are hard to predict, but one of the things that is predictable is we're going to get older. And there's a high likelihood. You talk about the people that say, I'm not leaving my home until they take me out in a pine box. My wife is a pharmacist, and she used to remind me, John, it's not always that easy. As I mentioned to you, how many times we upsize, downsize, move with family. We may want to move away from family. We may have to live with family. We may need the care of a community. It's now on a spectrum.
Can you help listeners understand or prepare or maybe set the stage for the meeting that they need to have with regard to family and how to make that step so it's not awkward? How to even start that conversation?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, one of the things that it's going to sound strange because money is like religion and politics, something we don't usually talk about. But we actually have a topic called Family Money Talks, like I was mentioning, Family Care Talks. Sometimes, especially, people that have assets, they sooner or later figure out that we should not die without some type of an estate plan, right? So an estate plan, putting together a will, thinking about how we're going to transfer assets, that's a natural conversation to have with a couple. But, Billy, you mentioned being in the business for 30 years. I'm sure you'll agree, for all 30 of those years, we've been talking about this generational wealth transfer, right? But we don't really think about, okay, we'll transfer the wealth, but when does the wisdom transfer? When do we share with the next generation what the values were that are important to kind of the matriarch and patriarch of the family? How was the wealth built? Mm-hmm. What does money mean to people? And so we begin a conversation at the values level, not just, hey, let's sit down and talk about who gets the stuffed cat in the living room and who gets the IRA and that kind of stuff. It's more, tell me what money means to you. But it's a two-way street. It's time for the children to share with the parents as well. What were the experiences? Who were the people that shaped how we think about money? What were the life events, so on and so forth? When we start at that values level, then it's just natural to progress into our overall relationship. Well, okay, I understand this. Has there been provision for care? And probably the most important conversation is, Mom and Dad, how have you thought about your care in this conversation, right? Have you given thought to it? What are your preferences? Because then we can begin a dialogue, right? So if Mom and Dad say, we really haven't talked about it, we're just going to stay here in this house, right? Well, we can talk to Billy. We can, because oftentimes that's not the way it happened. So what I always think about is, and I think about this for myself, if something were to happen where I couldn't stay in the home that I'm currently in, what would my likely next step be? So I'm almost visiting it mentally, my wife and I, to think, would we be with one of our 3 children? Would we look to down? Is our house currently able to accommodate us if we're physically limited in some way? So it's these kind of, just a simple question of saying, where would I be next if something were to happen? And to have that conversation, let people know what my feelings are about it. It's really important because, like I said, the worst spot and what tears families apart is when we have that conversation when Mom and Dad are in the rehab facility. And it's not only the children, but it's the spouses of the children who are involved. And there's deep-seated feelings there. And some of the wounds that can happen when preferences aren't aligned can last a really long time, sadly.
Well, tear people apart.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just sitting here listening to you guys visit, and I don't know how you felt, Billy, but when you started in the business, you probably weren't asking clients about who do you care for beside yourself. It was more conversations around money. Even when I started in the business, money, retirement, and then it's evolved into what you do, where good advisors are asking those questions. Is there anyone you're going to need to provide care for? What's that plan look like? And I feel like we've opened up a lot of conversations with clients and their parents to, hey, our advisor said we should be asking you about this. And it's changed a lot of people's roles and it's helped them out quite a bit. So, and I guess what I'm saying is the advisor role has evolved from just being a money manager to a life manager.
Stockbroker in the old days.
Yeah, the stockbroker. Now we're life managers, I feel like, a lot of times.
It's going to sound strange, but a lot of that, I think, was facilitated by advancing technology, right? So when I joined the business 38 years ago, if you wanted to know how your portfolio was performing, you either waited for the Sunday paper or you came to talk to me. I was the keeper of the cards, right? I knew all the information. I was the provider of the information. Technology has now democratized information. It's everywhere. You can get it anywhere you want. Yeah. So the conversations that are going on with advisors is not just the asset management. It's really the deeper emotional conversations about what's important to me, what my experience has been, what I'm concerned about, what the opportunities are, so on and so forth. So, yeah, it's just natural. But, another thing I thought about that I'm sure you guys run into quite a lot is when we talk about retirement planning. Dr. Joe Coughlin is the founder and current director of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology AgeLab. And Dr. Joe says he believes that most couples should be planning for 2 retirements. And what's he mean by 2 retirements? It means the first retirement is the retirement we spend together. The second retirement is the retirement that we may be spending alone. Because today in the United States, I have 2 people age 65. There's a 50-50 chance that one of the 2 lives to age 92. For the ladies who might be listening today, probably don't have to share who the odds are in favor of there, right? There's a increasing chance with increased longevity that part of our retirement is going to be spent by ourselves. I think the number is 43% of households, 43% of women 75 and older are currently living in households of 1. Right. So as we think about that, that's another thing not to ignore, but to say, yes, it's financial. So what happens to our income? What happens to our expenses? But it's all of that is driven by what's the life circumstance like then? Do you think you would stay in your home? Do you think you would? This can facilitate the conversation as well. Hey, if anything were ever to happen to mom, if anything were ever to happen to dad, what do I think I would do? And the answer may be, I don't know right now, but at least to your point, Billy, the seed is planted to say this is something we probably should think about.
Being a parent myself, I think about this stuff too, and understanding that I have kids and I'm becoming adult kids, and what I want to see them do with their lives, hopefully, and money and wealth, and what I've spent most of my life creating. I don't want to just see it tossed into the wind. And I see that with a lot of other people, having dealt with hundreds and hundreds of clients over the years. I've seen the good and the bad and the ugly. But I also want to not be afraid to open that conversation myself, to where I can actually sit them down and say, this is what I think. These are my core beliefs and values, what I believe about money and how to take care of money, be a good steward of money. But also, I want you to relay this to your spouses. You mentioned the spouses, and oftentimes those in-laws are the tragedies of the families. I mean, I'm just going to put the facts out there. Completely different alignment, backgrounds, family circumstances, and then somehow change the belief system of the son or daughter in the family. And so that can really disrupt the core dynamic of a family. Getting through that and hopefully keeping your family together with the similar values. And I've read a lot about Vanderbilts and the people that blew it, had billions, literally billions of dollars. And then you hear about the Carnegies and the people that have changed and have generational type meetings where they're not afraid to talk about it.
Right.
And I'm just interested if you guys go through that in your studies and the people you work with, as far as what are the best ways to leave behind the legacy that you want so your family can not only remain intact and working together. That's what we all want as parents, to see our kids thrive, but still stay together and connected.
Yeah.
And not lose that once the parents are gone.
Yeah. So we do it in a workshop format, guys, where we have people walk through 3 specific exercises. So we call them 3 intelligences. So the first intelligence is financial intelligence. So this is directly about money. I want you to talk about the greatest lesson you ever learned about money, the biggest mistake you ever made with money, lessons that if I asked you today, you think it would be important to pass down to the next generation. And we do this in a group. We'll take 6, 8 people who don't know one another, and we'll ask them to start sharing what some of those lessons are. So that's step 1. It's strictly financial, like some of the best things you've ever done, some of the biggest mistakes you've ever made, which are kind of funny, right? When you talk about it, sometimes you go back and think, oh my gosh. But again, here's the thing. When you talk to the next generation about money, or sometimes it's children wanting to talk to the parents about money. By the way, neither one of those generations wants to talk about money, generally speaking, because the parents feel like if I talk about money, the kids are going to feel entitled, they'll be lazy, and I'll lose control. The kids are like, I don't want to talk to mom and dad about the money because they'll think I'm pushy. I'm like trying to get my hands on something that isn't mine. And therefore, we don't talk about it, right? So if we can talk about it in terms of the lessons that we've learned, that's financial intelligence. The second type of intelligence we talk about is really about relational intelligence. And here we're talking about like a a family tree, thinking about who are the people that most influence the way you think about money. So this is where oftentimes we'll ask people, just draw a family tree and just go back to your parents and grandparents. And it's not only what they said. A lot of times people are like, no, well, my grandfather told me this or my grandmother told me this. That might be it. But it may also be what you observed in the way they dealt with money or the way they talked about or the way they lived their lives. So I'll give you an example. One of the examples I use to get people thinking about this has to do with charitable giving and charitable intent. Something that's very important to my wife and I. Well, I remember as a 6 or 7 year old boy, a lot of us don't remember a lot of what happened back then, but I remember when I was 6 or 7 years old, I'd go over to my grandparents' house every Saturday morning, and my grandfather would have his 1972 Chevy Nova loaded with Meals on Wheels to deliver. And I would get in the car with him, and we'd go out and deliver these meals. And the people that we delivered to sometimes were pretty broken down. They had a lot of physical issues. And the first thing they'd want to do when they saw 6-year-old boys put the clamps on them, right? Give me a big hug, which was kind of terrifying at that age. Yeah. But 10 years later, I realized that the meal was probably the least important thing they got that day. We might have been the only people that they saw the entire week. Yeah. And that just stuck with me. That was something I observed in what he did that influenced me. So that's what that family intelligence is about. How did you see behaviors? Maybe there was an event where, and by the way, they're not all positive, right? It could be an event where you saw someone struggle in business and it cost, and you were therefore became very risk averse. No feelings are wrong. They are feelings, right? Mm-hmm. And behind them are experiences. The third type, or the third exercise we ask people to do is around their values intelligence. If I gave you a list of values, which we do, whether it's faith, whether it's adventure, whether it's travel, whether it's whatever it is, I'd ask you to pick 2 or 3 of those values you think are most important in your family, and then tell me how that value is reflected in the way you live and your relationship with money, or when it comes to your relationship with care or other family members. See, if we start at these levels, right? Not at the estate planning level where we're just making the X's and O's. Those naturally lead to the conversations about, well, what happens or what happened in the family when grandma got sick or, wasn't able to stay in her home anymore. By the way, these are very emotional conversations. Look, no one will escape the sense of guilt that associates when you have to make some decisions that sometimes mom and dad aren't always in agreement with. But if the family is warring with one another saying, Billy wants to do this, but I think that's totally wrong. And, mom's never going to live through this if we follow Billy's that's where those wounds occur. So at least trying to get on the same page or visiting some of these things, very important. So that's how we start the conversations, Billy. We get people talking about what's important to them from a value, how they care to be treated, their own experiences. How many clients tell you, spoken or unspoken, I don't want to be a burden to my children?
A lot.
Well, we think about that strictly in terms of money, but we don't think about it in terms of care.
The care, mm-hmm. Which is in my opinion, the larger burden by far.
So I have another great little story for you. There was a woman that went to my church back in Pennsylvania, where I'm originally from. And she was in her mid-80s. She lived in a townhouse on the 3rd floor of a townhouse. So she was up and down 3 flights of steps. She came to us and said, I'm really concerned about this. She had assets, but she had never thought about a senior community. So I recommended a couple that I was familiar with. She went and met with them. She did choose one to move into. 3 years later, she was giving tours to new people who would come to visit that community. And she used to end her tour with this great line. I couldn't have thought of it by myself. She would look at the people, and the last thing she would say is, this is the best gift you'll ever give your children. My kids never have to worry about whether I'm eating right, whether I have friends around, and so look, these communities aren't for everyone, but I believe the time to investigate these communities is not when I need one in 2 weeks. It's when I'm in my 60s and I can really begin to evaluate 50s, 60s, whenever, to say, what do they cost? Where are they at? What services do they specialize in something? Could I picture myself here?
Yeah.
I mean, it's important because as we live to these later ages, we may eventually need that kind of care. It may be something, think about it, that our family is incapable of providing. And if I burden them with that, it's not only the financial burden, it's the emotional burden of trying to manage mom and dad's health. It's very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Some of the myths around this aging process where some younger generation kids, let's call them, they assume that there's going to be care provided and they don't have a clue of what the costs are. They think that it's just all part of the system. The government's going to pay for that or whatever. So even if they're not sophisticated or super wealthy, can you go through maybe some of the myths that people have around this process? And, oftentimes mom and dad don't want to go to a home,
Sure.
Keep me out of that damn thing. I'm not going into that. I've heard that countless times. But what do you do about that? And, when you can't take care of them and you don't have the resources to do so?
I'll tell you the biggest myth is that Medicare is going to pay for it.
Yeah.
Medicare doesn't pay for long-term nursing home stays.
Yeah.
So
$0.
I always tell people, you really have three options when it comes to care. I'm like, the first option, not many people opt for, it's called Medicaid. And in that option, all you have to do is prove yourself penniless to your state government, usually in terms of income or assets. Because somebody read an article about this, they say, sounds great. I know what I'll do. I'll give all the assets to the kids, and then I'll say I'm penniless.
Ding, ding, ding.
Ding.
That does not work.
What's the look back period? 2 or 3 years?
Yeah. Believe it or not, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And you've got to be careful there. There's a lot of not reputable services that claim that they'll help steward you through that process. It's not the way most people go.
Yeah.
So you're left really with two potential options. You can insure against it in terms of long-term care, right? And this is where your listeners are like, oh, here's where John from Hartford sells long-term care. Guys, we don't even offer a long-term care policy. I'm just telling
Relax, people.
Yeah, I'm just telling you. You have two options. One is to insure against it. The other is to pay it out of pocket. And I'll just give you one number that I'm familiar with. If you're going to pay out of pocket for dementia care, from a time a person is diagnosed with some form of dementia, Alzheimer's, for example, until they pass away, the average is now estimated at $405,000 out of pocket cost.
Wow.
Right? So again, and that's just the cost. That's not arranging and thinking about how you're going to provide care, so on and so forth.
That's worse than putting a kid through college.
Exactly. And that's oftentimes that's what we describe in terms of care. In many facets that you'll be dealing with, it is a fair way to think about it. When we think about aging, we think about a parabola, right? When we're young, we need a lot of oversight and care from others. We become more and more independent, and then eventually starts to go the other way, and we become dependent in a different way than when we were 2 years old, but certainly in many cases just as dependent later in life. So again, I think you asked about biggest mistake earlier. I think it's assuming that that's not going to happen to me, right? And by the way, if it doesn't happen to you, no one, unless your birth certificate was born with an expiration date on it, no one knows how long it's actually going to last. But my viewpoint is that you're not in worse shape for considering what might happen if I get into this situation. Just visiting it psychologically, beginning to lay some paths with your loved ones, I think is a healthy exercise, because I do think the chances are that you will find yourself in a situation like that at some point.
Well, unless you're like me, I'm planning on going the Benjamin Button route and just getting to that point and then heading back the other way.
Exactly.
Exactly. They'll care for me again as a young child, and then it's over.
Yeah, we just wait for everybody to figure out how to freeze us or come up with that proper genetic combination that we're going to wake us up.
When you're on the phone with a client and you want to say, is everything okay? And then you hang up and you think, should I call their sister? Should I call their son or daughter?
Because you could create some anger.
We could create anger where I'm fine. What are you talking about? Well,
Right.
you did these weird things, or you said, no, I didn't. I mean, it becomes very awkward sometimes, but we have prevented a lot of clients, victims of fraud or doing something wrong with their money that we know by taking that step.
Another area that we haven't discussed, but when it comes to care, fraud right now is
It's
off
through
the
the
charts.
roof.
And, I think when I talk to people, especially people who are later in their aging years, they tend to think it's some goofy kid sitting in their basement, right, trying to trick me out of my money.
No.
These are multinational corporations whose business it is to defraud people out of their money. And AI is only making it worse. It's a weird thing, AI, right? It can help detect fraud, like with our banks and credit cards and things like that, but it is being used by fraudsters as well. So I'll just mention one because it's really prevalent and growing. It's a type of fraud called romance fraud. And don't know if you've heard about it.
Oh, yeah.
We know.
Yeah.
John's actually been a victim of that.
Is that right? Yeah, there you go.
Just sweep me off my feet with some emails and texts.
But what happens now is very, very sad, is that, we know that loneliness is an epidemic in the United States, primarily because we are living by ourselves at some point. It gets lonely. We seek companionship. And then we meet the man and the woman, or the woman from France that we started an online Facebook, whatever relationship with. They start texting us separately. They say, look, if I only had $20,000, we could meet.
Yeah, I'll fly out.
I'll fly out. We'll meet. We'll have dinner together. It'd be great. This could really kick things off. So we wire the money, and we never hear from them again. And most of that type of fraud goes unreported, because the people who suffer from it are embarrassed, that they got. But it's emotionally gut-wrenching. It's financially difficult. So we always talk about using either designated family members or financial advisors as a circuit breaker there before it gets too far into it. Make sure you ask people about this, because when we talk about forms of fraud, a lot of fraud information comes from our workplace. Employers tell us how to find a phishing email or how to spot this kind of, well, when we retire, unless we're talking to our friends about this stuff, it's very difficult to locate someone that can tell us
Nobody knows
going on
what's
today.
going on at
Exactly.
that age. It's scary for the senior citizens who aren't super literate. It's happened to my dad. The exact same thing. A grandparent's scheme.
Yes.
They got the grandchild and he's in jail and he's been busted for drugs.
And don't call the parent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's so realistic.
Oh, the voice and now video.
Yeah,
Video is coming.
The AI.
And well, they know names too, like specifically calling
Yes.
out Cade is in jail, Billy's son.
And acting and has the voice just like Kate. Acting like this is Kate. And my dad's losing it.
Yeah.
With this person on the phone thinking, I need to send this person $5,000. Luckily, he doesn't use credit cards hardly ever. So he just called me. He was so upset about it.
This may be another opportunity to begin a conversation, right? Hey, I just had a friend. I just read an article. A friend of mine's parents just got taken in some way and our parents oftentimes, my mom's always asking me, is this thing real? Is this a scam? Is this well, that can begin a conversation about what's going on in fraud and how we take care about preventing it, but it also can be a lead into other care topics, right? So this is financial fraud. And we talked about, care in your home and,
so now that opens the door for other stuff.
Am I your power of attorney? Like that's such an important document to have and have it before it's too late. Like running to the attorney, hey, mom's losing her capacity, and getting a power of attorney is not as you can't do it then. You got to do it before, and it comes with that planning conversation.
Exactly. Because when we think about money, look, to some people, money is very emotional, but money itself is not emotional. It's the values behind the money that cause the emotion.
Right.
But we all know we should have a will. We all know we should have an estate plan. We all know we should revisit it so many years. It's kind of been beaten into us, but it's kind of an unemotional topic. Okay, got to get an attorney, got to talk to the folks at Peterson about what I got to be aware of. Let's just get it done. Then I don't have to think about it, right?
Like going to the dentist. I don't want to go.
Bingo.
But I have to do it.
Bingo. Yeah. But when it comes to care, it's so much more emotional that we don't want to just go there and talk about it. So we do have to be, I use the word intentional. We do have to be intentional about whether you're a parent thinking about having the conversation with your children or whether you're the children thinking about having a conversation with mom and dad. Now, look, you may get to a point where you suggest to mom and dad, hey, can you share with me a little bit about what you're thinking? Mom and dad would be like, nope, don't want to talk about it. I don't have much advice for you there other than to tell you the caregiving experts that we work with say that this is not a once and done conversation. This is a conversation that should be talked about over time. Maybe not the same way, the same format, the same topic, but the topic of care should be brought up repeatedly, because maybe if somebody wasn't in the mood to talk about it here, now you risk they could get very upset. Why do you keep bringing it up? But again, those caregiving experts say this is an ongoing conversation.
I love that, because it's your wealth. And a lot of people use this excuse. Well, it won't be my problem. I'll be dead. You can deal with it. That's the cheap way out. That's just the lazy way out, because it's still the money that you spent your whole life to create.
Exactly.
And now you're just going to have it go willy-nilly and have the estate attacked by whatever taxes or other predators out there.
Yeah.
I mean, because you refuse to get out of your own way and you refuse to think about your own mortality, even though it's uncomfortable. We've had clients like that, a lot of them. The type A, I'm never going to die. I don't want you to even mention that subject. And then they're on there very ill, very like they can see now I'm within days, not months maybe. And now I'm going to maybe start doing some things. Well, guess what? You might even have lost your capacity to even now make decisions, and you haven't done anything. As Shaun mentioned, you haven't appointed a power of attorney, so that therefore you cannot, you don't have the mental capacity to do so. Now the state or whatever authority is going to come in and say, here's what's going to happen with your money. And you fail to take action, and kids are wondering, and maybe spouse is wondering, and maybe girlfriend or mistress is wondering.
We've seen that.
We've seen it all.
Yeah. Well, and then they also didn't take the time to educate their children on how hard it was to create that wealth and what they did and what they hope that they do, like you talked about earlier. And then we've seen it so many times: easy come, easy go. Yeah. That money comes into an inheritor's account, and it's very difficult. Then we're the educators. Like, we worked with your dad for this many years. These are his values. Like, it's hard.
What is it? 3 generations and the money's gone, pretty much.
So
it feels like one sometimes.
So we have research on this. The old saying is, first generation makes it, second generation maintains it, third generation loses it.
There you go.
I got news for you. First generation makes it. 70% of second generation loses it. 90% of third generation loses it. Oh. So again, I choose not to talk about it because, to your point, I'm not going to be around. Look, it's about transferring that wisdom as well as the wealth. Like you talked about the client who on their deathbed hadn't done anything to prepare, a will or an estate plan. Okay, well, the government is now going to control, and they're going to take their fair share. Because I think you guys will agree, the greatest asset in planning, whether it's life planning, financial planning, anything, it's not interest rates, it's not equity returns, it's time. And none of us really knows how much time we have, but we know we have time now. So again, continuing to put these things off, not having the conversation, that's why I use the word intentional. It's really important to intentionally begin to provoke some of these conversations that may take us to a place that may be uncomfortable, but we will be better off for making the effort.
For sure.
We find our women clients want the planning. They are very much open to this conversation. They want to talk about it. A lot of the men, I don't know whether it's ego, whether it's just that they don't want to get into this emotional stuff. Maybe it's just how we're wired. Most of us don't. Do you find that? Is that common?
Well, let me give you a psychological tape that plays in a lot of our heads if we're men. If we're men, we say to ourselves, well, we're going to go first because we're the man. That's the way it's supposed to work. I know I've read about mortality and I heard it all the time. I'm not going to be here to deal with it. And then guess what happens? It doesn't work out quite that way. And I can tell you those are some of the most devastating situations because, the wife is typically the social organizer, chief operating officer of the household. And if I've never planned for, when I say we need to plan for 2 retirements, that's both parts of the couple. Yeah. I need to envision what it would look like if she wasn't here, if he wasn't here. How would things change financially from a living standpoint, so on and so forth? Horrible to think about, but it's likely to happen. And if we don't psychologically visit it, then everything's a surprise at the moment of crisis, right? Oh, we've got to do this, we've got to do this, and you're not in an emotional state to make. By the way, that's when mistakes happen, right? When we're emotionally vulnerable, that's when mistakes happen. So that's why, yes, we see it all the time, Billy, especially for men. We do see, MIT would tell us that women, in their estimation, make better long-term investors. And one of the interesting things is they say that women have a bigger decision box when it comes to making decisions. What do we mean by that? Well, if you're a guy, you're thinking about numero uno and my spouse. I may think about adult children, but oftentimes my view is, hey, I got them out of the nest. They're on their own, right? We'll take care of them with some money transferring. Mom is thinking about her spouse, her adult children, her friends, her parents, her grandchildren. Like, the decision box is much greater. So we find that women are deeper researchers. It'll take longer in general, generally speaking, to make financial decisions because they will exhaust the research, whether that's bouncing ideas off of family and friends, whether that's researching things online, whether it's coming to see you guys 3 or 4 times before they're ready. Guys are often more impulsive. Hey, that sounds good. Let's go with it. Let's take it. Men often overestimate their ability to manage risk.
Really?
Women oftentimes, in fact, it's kind of funny. A lot of times people say, well, women aren't comfortable making investment decisions. They're not used to being in that role. What we find is women often accurately assess their investment capabilities. Men often overestimate them. And so, the right answer is probably somewhere in the middle. But it's something that, as a guy, you have to be particularly mindful of, because these conversations that you don't want to have, there's a reason you don't want to have them. You may have to show some vulnerability. You don't actually know what might happen, and you need to investigate some of that. Like, again, I say the most underestimated aspect of working with great advisors is not just the financial piece. You all have seen people make these kind of transitions hundreds of times, and you can share with them, obviously changing the names to keep confidentiality, but you can describe situations where something did or didn't happen. You can say, many of the clients that I work with, if they had to do it all over again, I think they would have changed this, or they wouldn't have changed the thing. This is exactly what they wanted to have happen. Sharing those kind of insights is really, really important, both for you to do, but also for those prospective clients to listen to.
So important.
Yeah.
There's a great movie out there. It's a series. You guys have heard of Taylor Sheridan.
Mm-hmm.
I was telling Shaun about this the other day. Taylor Sheridan, who created Yellowstone and many offshoots from that. But he has a movie out there called The Madison. Not a movie, it's a series. Anyway, it deals with this conversation, with losing the patriarch. So the spouse, very wealthy family, never understood all the nuances and the things that dad was doing, business with his activities beyond business, and the love that he had for, in this case, it was fly fishing and getting out of this big city and going to Montana. And the wife and the daughters then have to, the rest of the show, the series is about them coming to terms with all of this stuff and dealing with it and processing it. The whole thing is so important to me, and why I mention it is he has a journal that they find, and it's all about his life and what's important. And this is how the show unfolds and why it's so great. Is I think that's a tool that we could all learn from is, if you don't want to have the conversations with your family, how about you leave a legacy of some sort where they can look back and say, oh, this is what dad loved. This is what he loved about me, or this is why he did what he did. And that's, I think, an often overlooked piece in this whole conversation, is they don't ever leave anything behind. You don't have any way to understand them after they're gone.
We may know 1 or 2 things about our grandparents, but to your point, Billy, wouldn't it be cool to go back and read about, or today there are actually companies that are videoing interviews with people talking about one-on-one, what was most important to me, my greatest achievements, my biggest concerns, by just sharing who I am, because the next generation can learn so much from that, or maybe the generation after them, to be able to look back. Say, I don't know about you guys, but I always think the generations that came before us are much smarter than we are.
Yeah.
I mean, they can figure out how to do anything. Yeah. Right?
Stronger, too.
That's what I'm talking about.
I always have that vision.
Absolutely. Yeah. These were tough people,
yeah.
And so how did they deal with setbacks? How did they deal with, having to figure things out themselves? I think we in ourselves possess that kind of power, but we don't take the time to record it because we're not intentional about it, right? I keep a journal myself, and I hope someday, my kids are interested in taking a look at it. Anything that you can do to relay that kind of stuff, because if you don't, it will fade very, very quickly.
Very fast. My grandpa, I remember I was, I don't know, like 20 years old, and I poked my head in his office. He's kind of grouchy guy, but what are you doing, Grandpa? I'm writing a book. Well, what is it? It's about me. And I said, oh,
Sounds like
Good for him.
yeah, it was Grandpa Crandall. And he said, I'm writing it so you don't forget about me after I die. I'm like, well,
Very
okay, Grandpa.
straightforward.
I'm walking down the hall. He was so now I just you talking about that, I remember him writing that book. Have I read it? No. Do I know where it is? Yes. I guarantee my Uncle Robert has it, so I could pull that out and read all of his stories, and I think that'd be so cool.
And you can remember certain things that stick out that they might have shared with you, but the details in between, like I could tell you my grandfather on my father's side was in New Jersey the day the Hindenburg blimp blew up. He witnessed it. What a memory. Told me 60 things.
Oh, yeah.
But, they fade.
It's hard to remember.
So
all that
part
stuff.
of all of this is inviting people to share their memories, but also share their hopes, their intents, and especially their values. And that's, if you take nothing more from this conversation, I think you should desire to share the most important values with the next generation. Be intentional about it because it's important.
And along those lines, if you're a type of person who just can't bring themselves to do it, there's ways for the younger generation to get it started. And I have actually a journal myself. It's a book that I purchased, and it's laid out. It's like a template that I can go sit down with my dad and I can ask him questions. And I can say, hey, Dad, tell me about when you were seventh grade. Or tell me about your mom and dad. And what kind of meals did you have? What did you do on Sundays? What was the funnest thing that you did with your friends when you didn't have school? And so there's these questions that you can ask, get the conversation started, and I'm just writing them down.
Yeah.
Because I know he's not the type of person that's going to do it, but I want to know that so I can share that with my kids. And I think there's probably a lot of resources.
Absolutely. And oftentimes, again, getting back to that care conversation or even lifestyle conversation, a lot of times we base our vision of our future life based on what we observed in our grandparents and grandparents, right? So if my mom took care of her mother in this method, she's probably going to follow in that path of saying, this is what I would hope for, right? But if we, the kids, are not aware of what happened and the pros and cons of doing it that way, and it's just sprung. Now we have
It's a shot in the dark.
Yeah. Well, Mom, the best thing for you would be a reretirement home. Well, that's the last thing on her mind.
She had the vision of what happened to her mom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why these conversations are so important. And it's not to lecture. It's to kind of come to a common vision, right? And to agree, what might happen if.
Yeah.
And that's why the one lady wanted to send across the field, because
Exactly.
she had an experience. She didn't want to have that same experience.
She did have a bad one. I remember
And
that.
it wasn't good. But I think these are all some really, really good conversation pieces. Get things started with your family members and to understand what's going on. We're all going to face this. This isn't just maybe it'll happen to me, maybe it won't. I mean, I think odds are very, very high that you're going to have one parent that's going to need some care, and maybe two, and potentially yourself. So this isn't just end with your parents. It transfers down.
It does.
It's just it's an ongoing cycle, and we all have to deal with it. And what bothers me is understanding reality these days. We talked about journaling and actually getting back to the old-fashioned writing things down and explaining your feelings and writing things on paper. But nowadays, it just seems like these kids they're just posting stuff on Instagram and how wonderful they're like. Is that what it's going to turn to, John? Is everybody's just going to look at their Facebook page and say, "Oh,
this is
I
what
guess
he
Mom
liked."
liked that vacation."
Yeah.
All right, so let me just share this with you. So Facebook, as you know, is the chosen platform for the aging generation. Our kids don't even bother with Facebook because they figure that's for us. As we age, and this is why scams are such a problem, as we age psychologically, we actually filter out negative messages and we focus on the positive. So we want to disbelieve the bad in people and we look for the good. So, when I talk to my mom about Facebook, this is a heartbreaking but true scenario. She said, "John, I need you to look at my phone." I'm like, "Why? What happened, Mom?" She said, "Well, you know how you have these Facebook posts from a woman who's very disabled lying in a hospital bed that says, will somebody please say they love me today? My mom responds, I love you. Bang, 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 bang. Facebook alerts all over the place. Facebook accounts locked. Facebook. And I lost my cool. I'm like, Mom, I've told you, you can't. I was lecturing her like she used to lecture me. Mm-hmm. She started to cry. She said, take it all off. I don't want any of it. I said, Mom, this is how we share photos. And it's important to you. So these conversations, they're so important. And it's how we learn.
I want to feel like they're engaged in the community.
So when we filter out those negative messages, that's one of the reasons why we become more vulnerable as we age. And if you read that somewhere, if somebody like me tells you that, it's not a family member telling you. This is reality. You spoke about reality. This is what happened. So if we're thinking about ourselves, we need to be on guard, and we need to recognize behaviors in ourselves to ask others for help. Also, Facebook, not just that platform, but social media in general. How many times do you see people post the really gut-wrenching emotional things that they're going through? No. Maybe they post things like, I'm doing the wash right now. I'm always like, who cares, right? But no.
I'm working out. They love to do that one.
Yeah. We talk about journaling. The type of journaling we're talking about are the things that are deepest and most emotionally valuable to you, that you would want to share with that next generation. That is key, because I don't know about you guys, but I don't want the next generation just knowing whatever's on the headstone. When I was born, when I died, they talk about the dash in between. It's that dash in between that you're trying to capture and pass to the next generation.
Huge. Yeah. That's a great place to end it right there. Leave you some things to think about, folks. And, if any of these words of the conversation spark something in you that you need to take a step, I would absolutely not forget about it. I would take that step to make that conversation happen. Mom and Dad, or maybe with your kids. We want to thank John Diehl for being on hand today.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Great insight. Until next time, folks, stay in the saddle out there.
Thank you for listening. For more information about today's show, please check out the show notes. Visit our website at www.petersonws.com or give us a call at 801-475-4002. Peterson Wealth Services is a registered investment advisor. This is a paid-for advertisement. Information presented on this program is believed to be factual and up-to-date, but we do not guarantee its accuracy, and it should not be regarded as a complete analysis of the subjects discussed. Discussions and answers to questions do not involve the rendering of a personalized investment advice, but are limited to the dissemination of general information. A professional advisor should be consulted before implementing any of the options presented. Peterson Wealth Services.